The scorching wind howled across the endless expanse of rust-colored sand, carrying with it the bitter taste of desolation and the promise of death. Nera pressed forward, her azure skin glistening with perspiration that evaporated almost instantly in the searing heat. The ancient staff in her hands hummed with dormant power, its crystalline core pulsing weakly in rhythm with her exhausted heartbeat. 3 days had passed since the Kravak attack on her settlement. 3 days of wandering through this hellish desert, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the sacred weapon of her ancestors. The memories of that terrible day haunted her every step, the screams of her people, the acrid smoke of burning homes, the six-legged monstrosities that had descended from the sky like locusts of destruction. She was the last, the only survivor of the Alari outpost on Karath Prime, at least as far as she knew. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, a bloated orange orb that seemed to mock her struggles. Nera's throat felt like sandpaper, and her legs trembled with each step. She had rationed her water carefully, but the last drops had passed her lips hours ago. The desert was vast, seemingly infinite, and she was just one small speck of life fighting against the inevitable. A low rumble broke through the constant whisper of the wind. Nera lifted her head, squinting against the glare. On the horizon, a wall of darkness was rising, not the darkness of night, but something far more ominous. A sandstorm of apocalyptic proportions was bearing down on her, its leading edge already beginning to blot out the sun. Terror gripped her chest. She had witnessed such storms before, seen entire cities buried under mountains of sand in minutes. Without shelter, she would be flayed alive by the razor-sharp grains before being suffocated and entombed. Nera forced her exhausted legs to move faster, scanning desperately for any form of protection. The landscape was maddeningly uniform, nothing but rolling dunes and scattered rocks. But wait. There, perhaps a kilometer to her left, a dark line cut through the sand. A ridge of ancient stone weathered and pitted by countless storms. The rumble was growing louder now, and when she glanced back, the sandstorm loomed like a mountain of malevolent brown gold, easily 100 meters high and stretching to both horizons. Lightning flickered within its depths, and she could feel the electromagnetic charge building in the air, making her staff tingle with resonance. Nera ran. Despite her exhaustion, despite the burning in her lungs and the protests of her muscles, she ran faster than she had ever run before. The storm's leading winds reached her, pelting her with stinging sand grains that felt like tiny bullets against her exposed skin. The rocky ridge grew larger as she approached, and she could see now that it wasn't just a simple outcropping. There were crevices, gaps in the stone that might offer protection. One fissure about halfway up the ridge looked particularly promising, wide enough for her to squeeze through, yet narrow enough that it might shield her from the worst of the storm. The wind was howling now, a banshee wail that threatened to burst her eardrums. Sand was flying everywhere, reducing visibility to mere meters. Nera reached the base of the ridge just as the storm's full fury arrived. The world became a chaos of wind and sand, a maelstrom of destruction that would scour the flesh from bones in seconds. She clawed her way up the rocky face, her staff strapped to her back, feeling blindly for handholds. Sharp stone tore at her palms, and more than once she nearly lost her grip as the wind tried to tear her away from the wall. But desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Her fingers found the lip of the crevice. With a final surge of effort, she hauled herself into the narrow opening. The blessed relief was immediate. The howling wind became a muffled roar, and the sandblasting ceased. Nera collapsed onto the stone floor of what appeared to be a shallow cave, gasping for breath, and feeling the sting of 1,000 tiny cuts on her exposed skin. She lay there for several minutes, simply grateful to be alive. The storm raged outside with undiminished fury, but here in this small sanctuary, she was safe. As her breathing gradually returned to normal, she became aware of something unusual. There was a smell in the air. Not the dry, dusty scent of ancient rock she would have expected, but something else entirely. Something organic, Wood smoke. Nera's eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and she could see that the crevice extended further back than she had first thought. In fact, it was more of a tunnel than a simple crack, and somewhere deeper within she could swear she saw the faint flicker of firelight. Curiosity overrode caution. Gripping her staff, she rose on unsteady legs and began to make her way deeper into the tunnel. The passage was narrow, forcing her to turn sideways in some places, but it was definitely leading somewhere. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and with it came other scents that made her heart race with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Food, cooked food. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and Nera stopped dead in her tracks. Before her was a scene so unexpected, so impossible, that for a moment she wondered if the desert heat had finally driven her mad. A human male sat beside a small fire, tending to what appeared to be a pot of stew. He was perhaps in his 30s, with dark hair and weathered features that spoke of years spent in difficult conditions. His clothes were practical and well-maintained, and beside him lay a device she didn't recognize, sleek and metallic, clearly of advanced design. The man looked up as she emerged from the tunnel, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. His eyes widened in shock, taking in her blue-green skin, her pointed ears, the clearly alien staff in her hands. Alari. He breathed the word, carrying a weight of awe and disbelief. He spoke in accented, but clear galactic standard. "You're Alari." Nera found her voice with effort. "And you're human. But that's impossible. Your species has been extinct for over 3 millennia. The man slowly rose to his feet, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Apparently, rumors of our extinction were greatly exaggerated. I'm Daniel. Daniel Cross, engineer and pilot, 4th-generation resident of Outpost Sanctuary." He gestured to the chamber around them. "And you are very welcome here, especially with that storm raging outside." Nera's mind reeled. Humans. Living humans. Not only that, but this one spoke of an outpost of multiple generations. How was this possible? The historical records were clear. Humanity had vanished from known space 3,000 years ago, their worlds found empty, their colonies abandoned. How? She managed to ask, sinking onto a convenient boulder as her legs gave out beneath her. "How are you here? How are any of you here?" Daniel returned to his seat by the fire, ladling stew into a metal bowl. He offered it to her with a gentle smile. "It's a long story, and you look like you could use some food and rest before we get into the details. You're safe here. This chamber is part of a much larger complex. We built it to withstand pretty much anything the desert could throw at us, including storms like the one out there." Despite her shock and confusion, Nera's survival instincts kicked in. She accepted the bowl gratefully and took a tentative sip. The stew was delicious, rich with flavors she couldn't identify, but which reminded her somehow of home. As she ate, she studied Daniel more carefully. He was definitely human. The bone structure, the skin tone, the hair were all unmistakably Terran. But there was something else, something in his eyes that spoke of depths she couldn't fathom. Intelligence, yes, but also a kind of patient watchfulness, as if he had been waiting for something for a very long time. "You said 4th generation," she said between spoonfuls. "Your family has been here for—" "About a century and a half," Daniel confirmed. "My great-grandmother was one of the original colonists who established Sanctuary. But our people have been in hiding far longer than that." Hiding. The word sent a chill down Nera's spine despite the warmth of the fire. Hiding? From what? Daniel's expression darkened. "The same thing you're running from, I'd guess. Your settlement, it was hit by Krivak raiders, wasn't it?" Nera's hand tightened on her staff. "How did you know?" "Because we've been watching them, tracking their movements, documenting their attacks. They've been systematically eliminating every potentially threatening civilization they encounter. They hit Alari settlements on Karath Prime 3 days ago. You're from the northern outpost, aren't you?" The confirmation that he knew that humans had been observing all along ignited a spark of anger in Nera's chest. You've been watching while they slaughtered my people, my family, and you did nothing." She started to rise, her staff beginning to glow with the fury of her emotions. But Daniel held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I know how it looks. I know how it must feel. But you have to understand we couldn't risk exposing ourselves. Not yet. Humanity's survival has depended on the galaxy believing we were extinct. One intervention, one slip, and the Krivak would come looking for us. All of us. So you just watched while entire civilizations burned?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "We saved who we could when we could without revealing ourselves. We've been gathering intelligence, preparing. The Krivak aren't just pirates or raiders, they're something far worse. They're trying to prevent any species from achieving the technological level that might pose a threat to them. And now, finally, we think we might have a way to stop them." Before Nera could respond, a low, thrumming sound echoed through the chamber. Daniel was on his feet instantly, grabbing his device and checking a display that had lit up on its surface. "What is it?" Nera asked, rising as well. "Motion sensors. Something's approaching the outpost." His face went pale as he studied the readings. "Krivak scouts. 2 of them." The implications hit Nera like a physical blow. "They followed me. They've been tracking me through the desert." "It doesn't matter how they found us," Daniel said grimly. "What matters is that they're here. And if they report back our location..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Both of them understood what would happen. The Krivak would bring a full assault force, and whatever sanctuary humans had built here would be destroyed. "Your outpost," Nera said urgently. "How many people?" 43 souls in the main complex. But it's not just our lives at stake." Daniel's fingers flew over the controls of his device. "Sanctuary isn't just a hiding place, it's a staging ground. We've been building something, preparing for the day when we could emerge and help the galaxy fight back against the Krivak menace. Then we have to stop them before they can report." Daniel looked at her with surprise. Nera hefted her staff, feeling the ancient power humming within its crystalline core. "You're right about one thing. This is bigger than just revenge for my people. If the Krivak are systematically destroying every advanced civilization, then someone has to stop them. And right now, we're all that stands between those scouts and the end of your people's 3,000-year plan." A smile ghosted across Daniel's features. "All right then. But we'll need to move fast. The scouts are probably planning to wait out the storm and then explore more thoroughly. That gives us a window of opportunity, but not a large one." He moved to what Nera had assumed was a natural wall of rock, but which she now saw was actually some kind of concealed panel. Daniel pressed his palm against a specific point, and the stone split apart with a soft hiss, revealing a passage that led deeper into the complex. "The scouts landed about a kilometer from here," he explained, as they moved quickly through the corridor. "They'll likely hole up in that cluster of ruins to the east, old Alari structures from a previous settlement. We can use the storm as cover to get close, but once it passes..." They emerged into a much larger chamber, this one clearly artificial, and filled with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything Nera had seen before. Humans in practical clothing moved with efficient purpose between the various stations, their faces showing controlled tension as they monitored displays and adjusted settings. Daniel. A woman with graying hair approached them. "The perimeter sensors." "I know, Commander Hayes. We're going to handle it." He turned to Nera. "This is Nera, the Alari survivor I mentioned might come through. Nera, this is Commander Sarah Hayes, Deputy Leader of Sanctuary." Hayes's eyes widened as she took in Nera's appearance, but she nodded respectfully. "We've been monitoring Krivak communications. They've been search patterns over the sector for the past day and a half. They're definitely hunting for someone." "Me," Nera confirmed grimly. "And now they've found something else entirely." Daniel was already moving toward a wall, lined with various devices and weapons. He selected what appeared to be a compact energy rifle and checked its charge. "Sarah, I need you to prep the emergency protocols. If this goes badly..." "It won't," Hayes interrupted firmly. Because you're not going alone. She gestured to several other humans, who were already arming themselves. Martinez, Thompson, Okafor, you're with them. Commander, I appreciate the offer, but nothing. This is exactly what we've been preparing for. Our entire existence depends on keeping this place secret. A few Krivak scouts are not going to be the end of 3,000 years of human planning. Nera felt a strange warmth at the display of solidarity. These humans barely knew her, yet they were willing to risk their lives alongside her. Thank you, she said simply. Hayes smiled. Thank me when we've sent those bugs back to whatever hell spawned them, preferably in pieces. The storm was beginning to weaken by the time they reached the surface, through another concealed exit. The wind was still fierce, but the worst of the sand clouds had passed, leaving the air merely hazy instead of impenetrable. Daniel led the way, using a handheld scanner to track the Krivak signatures. The team consisted of 6 individuals, Daniel and Nera, plus the 3 humans Hayes had selected. Martinez was a compact, athletic woman who moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. Thompson was a tall, lanky man whose pale eyes missed nothing as they swept the landscape. Okafor was built like a fortress, broad-shouldered and steady, carrying a weapon that looked capable of punching holes through armor plating. They moved in careful formation across the still shifting sands, using the lingering storm winds and occasional rock formations as cover. The ruins Daniel had mentioned gradually came into view, weathered stone structures that had once been part of an Alari settlement, now largely buried by centuries of sandstorms. Motion on the thermals, Thompson whispered, consulting his scanner. Definitely Krivak. 2 signatures just like the long-range sensors indicated. Nera studied the ruins through a pair of borrowed optical enhancers. The Krivak were easy enough to spot once you knew what to look for. Their 6-legged forms were unmistakable, even at a distance. They were investigating the structures methodically, using some kind of scanning equipment to probe the interior spaces. They're looking for something, she murmured. Or someone. You most likely, Daniel replied. The question is whether they've detected our presence yet. One of the Krivak scouts suddenly raised its head mandibles, clicking in what Nera recognized as their equivalent of speech. Both creatures turned toward the humans' position weapons, emerging from their carapaces with mechanical precision. I think that answers that question, Martinez muttered, bringing her rifle to bear. Wait, Nera held up a hand. Let me try something first. She stepped into the open, her staff held at her side in a non-threatening position. The Krivak immediately focused on her, their compound eyes glittering with malevolent intelligence. The larger of the 2 made that grating sound that served as their language, and to her surprise, her staff's translation function activated. Alari female, you will surrender. You will provide information about colonial networks. Resistance will result in extended termination process. Nera straightened, drawing herself up to her full height. I am Nera of the Karath Outpost, keeper of the Harmony Staff, daughter of the Eternal Weave. You murdered my people, destroyed my home. I will not surrender. I will not provide information. And if you want to kill me, you'll have to come and try. The effect was immediate. Both Krivak scouts raised their weapons' biomechanical constructs that fused living tissue with technology in a way that was both fascinating and nauseating. Energy began to build in the organic chambers, visible along their flanks. Now! Daniel shouted, and chaos erupted. The humans opened fire with disciplined efficiency. Their weapons were clearly designed for fighting Krivak high-velocity projectiles that could penetrate chitin armor and energy blasts tuned to frequencies that disrupted the aliens' biotech integration. One scout staggered as Okafor's heavy weapon punched a hole through its midsection ichor, spilling onto the sand. But the Krivak were far from helpless. The wounded scout returned fire, while its companion charged forward with surprising speed for something its size. Their weapons spat bolts of energy that turned sand to glass where they struck. Nera had fought Krivak before during the attack on her settlement. She knew their strengths and their weaknesses. As the unwounded scout charged her position, she waited until the last possible moment before raising her staff. The crystal core erupted with brilliant blue-white light, and a pulse of pure psionic energy slammed into the creature's nervous system. The Krivak screamed a sound like tearing metal and stumbled. Its charge became an uncontrolled tumble that sent it crashing into one of the ancient walls. But even wounded and disoriented, it was far from finished. It struggled to its feet, multiple eyes burning with hatred as they fixed on Nera. Meanwhile, the first scout had recovered from Okafor's hit and was laying down suppressing fire that had forced the humans to take cover behind fallen stones. Its weapon was charging for what looked like a much more powerful blast. "Thompson, Martinez flank left," Daniel shouted over the noise of weapons fire. "Okafor, keep it busy. I'm going for the second one." Nera saw him break cover, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had trained for this kind of combat. But the scout that had charged her was already swinging its weapon around to track him. Without thinking, she channeled power through her staff and leaped. Alari physiology was adapted for their homeworld's lighter gravity, and humans had built sanctuary on a world with similar conditions. She soared through the air in a perfect arc, coming down behind the Krivak, just as it was about to fire. Her staff's crystalline head struck the creature at the base of its skull, with a sound like breaking glass. Bioelectric energy surged through the weapon and into the scout's nervous system. The thing convulsed its weapon, firing harmlessly into the air before the alien collapsed, twitching once before going still. Nera landed in a crouch, already turning toward the second scout. Daniel and the others had closed the distance, and the alien was now caught in a crossfire. It was tough. She had to give it that even with multiple wounds, it was still fighting. But the end was inevitable. Thompson's precise shot finally found a weak point in the creature's armor, punching through into what passed for its heart. The scout toppled backward, legs curling inward as it died. Sudden silence fell over the ruined settlement. The storm had passed entirely now, leaving only the whisper of wind through broken stone and the distant howl of the desert wind. "Is everyone all right?" Daniel called out, checking his team. There were nods and affirmatives all around. A few minor cuts from flying debris, but nothing serious. Nera felt a surge of admiration for these humans. They had fought with skill and courage that rivaled any Alari warrior. "We need to move," Martinez said, consulting her scanner. "That firefight might have attracted attention, and we still don't know if these scouts managed to transmit a message before we took them out." Okafor was examining one of the dead Krivak with professional interest. "Biotech integration is more advanced than our intelligence suggested. These aren't just raiders. They're purpose-built for infiltration and reconnaissance." Thompson nodded grimly. "Which means there are others. Probably a command ship somewhere in the outer system." Nera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. "How many others?" "Unknown," Daniel replied. "But we have to assume the worst. Sanctuary is compromised. We need to evacuate the primary facility and implement the contingency plans." They made their way back across the desert, moving faster now that the storm had passed. The twin suns were beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Nera painfully of the burning of her settlement. As they approached the hidden entrance to Sanctuary, Daniel fell into step beside her. "You fought well back there. Your people, the Alari, are they all warriors like you?" Nera shook her head. "We're taught to fight, yes, but most of my people were farmers, artisans, scholars. The Harmony staff was passed down through my family. We were the settlement's guardians." Her voice caught slightly. "I failed in that duty." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You didn't fail. You survived. And sometimes survival is the greatest victory of all." They reached the concealed entrance, and Daniel pressed his palm to the hidden scanner. The stone face split apart with mechanical precision, revealing the lit corridor beyond. As they entered, Nera could hear the sounds of controlled chaos, people moving with urgent purpose, the hum of machinery being activated, and voices giving and acknowledging orders. Commander Hayes was waiting for them, her expression tense but relieved. "Thank the stars you're back. We've been monitoring the long-range sensors. There's definitely a Krivak ship in the outer system, a Dreadnought-class vessel." How long before they realize their scouts haven't reported in? Daniel asked. Hard to say. Could be hours, could be minutes. We're implementing Protocol 7, full evacuation to the secondary sites. Hayes paused, looking at Nera. Which raises a question. We have room for you, obviously, but we need to know, are you with us? This is no longer just about shelter from a sandstorm. Nera looked around the bustling chamber, taking in the faces of people who moments ago had been strangers. They had fought beside her, bled with her, and now were offering her a place among them. My people are gone. My settlement is ash. But you're right, this is bigger than any of us. If the Krivak are systematically destroying every race that might pose a threat to them, then someone has to stop them. I'm with you. Hayes smiled. Good. Then you need to see what we've really been building here. She led them through the complex past chambers Nera hadn't seen before. The scale of Sanctuary was much larger than she had imagined, a vast underground city, carved into the bedrock, humming with advanced technology that seemed decades ahead of anything she knew. They entered a massive chamber, dominated by something that took Nera's breath away. In the center of the space, surrounded by scaffolding and diagnostic equipment, sat a starship. But it wasn't like any ship she had ever seen. Its hull seemed to flow like liquid metal, and patterns of light moved beneath its surface in complex hypnotic patterns. Beautiful, isn't she? Daniel said, a note of pride in his voice. We call her Pathfinder. Hybrid technology, human engineering, married to principles we've learned from studying artifacts left behind by other extinct civilizations. The Krivak destroyed them all, Hayes explained. Dozens of species all eliminated before they could reach true interstellar capability. But they left things behind. Technologies that we've been studying, understanding, adapting. Nera approached the ship slowly, her staff beginning to resonate with something aboard the vessel. The vibration grew stronger as she got closer, and the crystalline core began to emit a soft, pulsing light. That's interesting, Daniel murmured, watching the staff's reaction. I've never seen it do that before. Your staff, Hayes said thoughtfully. It's not just a weapon, is it? It's some kind of focusing device for psionic energy. The Alari were one of the most psionically advanced species we've encountered. The Harmony staff has been in my family for generations, Nera confirmed. It's said to be able to channel the energy of the Eternal Weave, the psychic network that connects all Alari. She paused, a thought occurring to her. But my people are gone. The network should be silent. Unless, Daniel said slowly, it's connecting to something else, something that resonates on the same frequency. Before anyone could explore this further, an alarm began sounding throughout the complex. Hayes was immediately at a communication console, checking status displays. Long-range scanners have detected a massive energy buildup from the Krivak ship, she reported grimly. It looks like they're charging some kind of orbital bombardment weapon. How long? Daniel asked. 26 minutes, give or take. The implications were staggering. The Krivak weren't just going to search for their missing scouts, they were going to sterilize the entire area. Status on the evacuation, Hayes called to another operator. Primary personnel have been moved to the deep shelters. Secondary evacuation to off-site locations is 60% complete. That's not going to be enough, Daniel said. The deep shelters can withstand a lot, but not a full orbital strike from a dreadnought. Nera watched the scurrying activity around them, the controlled panic as people tried to save what they could of 3,000 years of planning and preparation. The ship. Is it operational? Pathfinder, she's flight ready, but... Then we go up. We take the fight to them. Daniel stared at her, as if she had suggested they fly into the nearest sun. Nera, that's a dreadnought-class vessel. Pathfinder is fast and well-armed, but she's not a warship. We'd be committing suicide. Maybe. But if we don't try, everyone here dies anyway. Plus, every human at the other sanctuaries once the Krivak start hunting them down. She lifted her staff, noting how it was vibrating more strongly now, as if responding to the ship's proximity. You said yourself that humanity has been preparing for this moment. Well, the moment is here. Hayes looked between them, and Nera could see the calculations running through the older woman's mind. Daniel, how long to get Pathfinder fully powered and ready for launch? She's already at standby power. Full readiness. 8 minutes if we skip the non-essential checks. Do it. I'll coordinate the final evacuation from here. As Daniel led Nera toward the ship, she caught his arm. I need to ask you something. Your technology, this ship, where did you get the principles for the design? Various sources, like I said. Archaeological finds, data recovered from dead worlds, theoretical advances over 3 millennia of research. He paused. Some of it came from Alari ruins, actually. Your people left fascinating records of their psycho-technological research. Nera's eyes widened as pieces began falling into place. The energy patterns in the ship's hull, the way my staff is reacting. This isn't just any hybrid technology, is it? Daniel smiled grimly as they reached the ship's boarding ramp. No, it isn't. Pathfinder uses a combination of human engineering and Alari psychic focusing principles. Your ancestors were building something similar when the Krivak found them 3,000 years ago. They entered the ship and Nera was immediately struck by the sensation of familiarity. The corridors, while clearly human in construction, had an organic flow to them that reminded her of Alari architecture. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The command deck was a marvel of integrated systems. Human control interfaces blended seamlessly with patterns that looked disturbingly like the Alari designs she remembered from ancient temples on her homeworld. Strap in, Daniel advised, settling into the pilot's chair. His hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, bringing system after system online. This might get rough. Nera took the co-pilot's seat, noting how her staff had begun resonating with something in the ship itself. As Daniel initiated the launch sequence, she felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling she had experienced when connecting with the Harmony staff, but magnified 1,000-fold. Daniel, she said carefully, I think there's something you need to know about this ship, and something I need to understand about my staff. But before she could explain further, Pathfinder lifted from its berth with impossible smoothness. The sensation of movement was barely perceptible, yet the displays showed they were rising rapidly through a concealed shaft that had opened in the chamber's ceiling. They emerged into the desert night, the ship's hull shimmering as some kind of cloaking system activated. Daniel brought them around in a graceful arc, pointing toward the stars, where somewhere in the darkness their enemy waited. Sensors show the Krivak ship is in high orbit, Daniel reported. They're definitely charging weapons. Energy buildup is at 70% and climbing. Nera studied the displays, noting how intuitively she seemed to understand the readouts. The orbital bombardment. It's not just about destroying Sanctuary, is it? They want to make sure nothing survives that might hold information about human survival. That's our assessment, yes. The Krivak are methodical. They don't leave loose ends. Pathfinder accelerated smoothly, rising through the atmosphere on pillars of coherent energy that left no exhaust trail. The ship's systems hummed around them with a sound that was almost musical, and Nera felt herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. There, Daniel pointed to the main display as they cleared the atmosphere. The Dreadnought. The Krivak ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of Pathfinder. Its biomechanical hull writhed with organic-looking channels and nodes, while technological components grafted onto its structure glowed with ominous energy. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, like watching a predator made of metal and flesh. Weapons range in 90 seconds, Daniel announced. Nera, I need to ask whatever you're sensing from the ship. Whatever your staff is telling you now would be a good time to share. She closed her eyes, focusing on the sensations flowing through the Harmony staff. The connection was stronger now, clearer than it had ever been. The ship isn't just using Alari principles, she said slowly. It's using Alari technology. Component systems, maybe even a core consciousness matrix. That's impossible. The artifacts we recovered were fragments pieces. No. Nera's eyes snapped open, and Daniel was startled by the intensity he saw there. Daniel, what if the Alari weren't completely destroyed? What if they did what you did, went into hiding, left pieces of themselves behind? Before he could respond, the ship's systems suddenly came alive in a way they hadn't before. Pathfinder's hull patterns became brighter, more complex, and new information began flowing across the displays faster than either of them could process. "What the hell?" Daniel began, but his words were cut off by a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Harmony staff recognized. Alari genetic pattern confirmed. Full system integration now available. Hello Nera, daughter of the Eternal Weave. I am the Pathfinder Intelligence. I have been waiting for you. The voice was definitely artificial, but with harmonics and tonal qualities that were unmistakably Alari. Nera felt tears forming in her eyes as she heard echoes of her people in the ship's voice. "You're an Alari AI," she breathed. "I am what remains of the consciousness of the exploration vessel Windwalker last ship to escape the destruction of Alari Prime. My organic crew died long ago, but before they passed, they gave me a new purpose to wait to learn to prepare for the day when Alari and humanity might work together against our common enemy." Daniel was frantically checking his instruments as Pathfinder's performance parameters shifted dramatically. "Nera, I'm reading system capabilities that are off the charts. If what this AI is saying is true, then we might actually have a chance," she finished. "PI, show us what you can do." "Integration with Harmony staff will unlock full combat potential," the AI responded. "But be warned, such integration has never been tested. The risks are worth it," Nera interrupted, standing and moving to a panel that had emerged from the deck. The crystalline head of her staff fit perfectly into a socket that opened to receive it. "If we're going to die, let's die fighting for something that matters." The moment the staff locked into place, the ship transformed. What had been merely advanced technology became something transcendent. Nera felt her consciousness expand, merging with the ship's systems, with the AI's vast knowledge with sensory input from across the electromagnetic spectrum. She was the ship. She was flying among the stars, feeling solar wind against her hull, like a caress. She could sense the Krivak dreadnought ahead of them, its biomechanical structure pulsing with alien life. And she could sense something else, the fear and anticipation aboard the enemy vessel as it registered Pathfinder's sudden transformation. "My God!" Daniel whispered, watching, as his instruments showed power readings that should have been impossible. "Nera, what have you done?" "What needed to be done?" she replied, her voice carrying harmonics of the ship's AI. What the Alari would have done 3,000 years ago if they'd had the chance. They were close enough now to see details of the Krivak ship. It was an abomination, she realized, not built so much as grown, like a cancer of metal and flesh. Its weapons were charging, preparing to rain death on the world below. "Incoming transmission," the Pathfinder Intelligence announced. "Krivak vessel is attempting communication." "Let's hear what they have to say," Daniel said grimly. The main display flickered and resolved into the image of a Krivak commander. Unlike the scouts they had fought on the surface, this one was modified with extensive technological implants. When it spoke, the translation was immediate and clear. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself. You are interfering with hegemony operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Nera felt a surge of rage at the arrogance in the creature's voice, the casual assumption that all other life was subordinate to Krivak will. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of the integrated ship systems. "I am Nera of the Alari, last guardian of Kirath Prime. You murdered my people. You have spent 3 millennia murdering the people of this galaxy, preventing them from reaching their potential, keeping them weak and afraid. That ends now." The Krivak commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Pathetic biologicals. You will be efficiency enhanced or terminated. Your choice." "I choose option 3, Nera replied, and her consciousness reached out through the ship's systems. What happened next was beyond anything Daniel had witnessed in all his years of training and preparation. Pathfinder didn't just attack it, danced. The ship moved with impossible grace, weaving between energy blasts that could have vaporized a city. Its own weapons responded not the crude projectile weapons he was familiar with, but something entirely new. Beams of coherent energy that seemed to bend space itself, creating impossible angles of attack. But the Kravac ship was far from helpless. Its biomechanical systems adapted with frightening speed, learning from each exchange of fire. What started as a one-sided confrontation quickly became a deadly ballet between two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare. Hull integrity at 95%, the PI reported with characteristic calm. Enemy vessel is adapting to our attack patterns, adjusting tactics. Nera could feel the flow of battle through her expanded consciousness. The Kravac ship was powerful, yes, but it was also predictable. It relied on overwhelming force and technological adaptation. Pathfinder used something else entirely: intuition, creativity, the kind of lateral thinking that biological minds excelled at. "There," she said suddenly, highlighting a section of the enemy vessel's hull on the tactical display. "That cluster of biomechanical nodes, it's how they're adapting so quickly. If we can disable it." "I see it," Daniel confirmed, his hands moving across his controls to target the designated area. "But their armor is too thick. We'd need to get inside their defensive perimeter." "Then that's what we'll do." Pathfinder suddenly accelerated, not away from the Kravac ship, but directly toward it. Daniel felt his stomach drop as he realized what Nera intended. "Nera, no, that's suicide. Trust me." The Kravac ship's weapons converged on their position energy, enough to glass continents, focusing on the small space Pathfinder occupied. But at the last possible moment, the ship's form shimmered and seemed to partially phase out of reality. They passed through the barrage unharmed, rematerializing inside the dreadnought's defensive perimeter. Before the Kravac could adjust, Pathfinder's weapons lanced out with surgical precision, striking the biomechanical adaptation nodes that Nera had identified. The effect was immediate and devastating. The alien ship's hull rippled as feedback surged through its systems. Its weapons went offline momentarily, and its organic components writhed as if in pain. But they weren't out of danger yet. The Kravac ship still had secondary systems, and it was already beginning to recover. Worse, at this close range, both ships would likely be destroyed if they continued to exchange fire. "PI," Nera said, an idea forming in her mind. "Can you access their computer systems from here?" "Attempting penetration of biomechanical interfaces," the AI replied. "This is unusual. Their systems are partially organic. I may be able to interface with the living components." What followed was less a battle than an invasion. The Pathfinder intelligence, guided by Nera's Alari intuition and powered by hybrid human-Alari technology, reached out and touched the mind of the Kravac ship itself. The contact was nauseating. The Kravac consciousness was alien beyond description, a collective intelligence built from the enslaved minds of 1,000 different species, all forced into service of a singular obsessive directive: prevent any other species from achieving technological transcendence. But within that corrupted collective, Nera sensed something else: fear. The Kravac hegemony was desperately afraid of something that lay beyond the galactic rim. Some threat so terrible that they had spent millennia ensuring that no other species would be strong enough to attract its attention. "My God," she breathed, sharing the revelation with Daniel through their connection to the ship. "They're not invaders. They're prisoners. There's something out there that they're trying to hide from." The knowledge changed everything. The Kravac weren't evil exactly. They were trapped, enslaved to a purpose that required them to keep the entire galaxy weak and divided. But understanding their motives didn't change the fact that they were still destroying entire civilizations. Through their connection to the dreadnought systems, Nera felt the presence of other ships. Not just the scouts they had already discovered, but an entire fleet in the outer system. Dozens of vessels, all preparing to converge on the planet below. "We can't fight them all," Daniel said, seeing the same tactical display. "Even with Pathfinder, We're outnumbered 50-1. Then we don't fight them, Nera replied. We show them a better way. She reached deeper into the ship's hybrid systems, accessing capabilities that even the Pathfinder intelligence hadn't known existed. The Harmony staff, fully integrated with Alari and human technology, began to resonate with frequencies that had been theoretical until this moment. Nera, what are you doing? Something that should have been done 3,000 years ago, she said. I'm making a choice not just for the Alari, not just for humanity, but for everyone who's ever died under Krivak bombardment. The staff flared with brilliant light that seemed to extend beyond the visible spectrum. Through the ship's sensors, Daniel could see the energy expanding outward, washing over the Krivak dreadnought, racing toward the fleet beyond. But it wasn't a weapon. As the energy touched each ship, something remarkable happened. The biomechanical systems that enslaved the organic components of the Krivak vessels began to break down. Not destroyed, but freed. Screams echoed through space, not of death, but of awakening. Thousands of species that had been forced into the Krivak collective for millennia suddenly remembered who they had been. The hegemony's vessels stopped their advance, their crews struggling to understand freedom for the first time in generations. The dreadnought they were connected to convulsed as its integrated systems fought between expansion and liberation. Nera felt the ship's biomechanical intelligence recoiling, not from her touch, but from the sudden return of choice. What have you done to us? The voice came from the Krivak commander, but it carried harmonics of dozens of different species. Given you back what was taken, Nera replied. The right to choose your own path. Through the ship's sensors, they watched as the Krivak fleet began to break apart, not physically, but organizationally. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination for millennia suddenly scattered as their crews rediscovered individual will. Some vessels turned and fled toward the galactic rim, their crews choosing to face whatever lay beyond, rather than continue as instruments of oppression. Others simply stopped their crews overwhelmed by the sudden return of memories and identities that had been suppressed for generations. But not all of them chose freedom. Several ships, their commanders too deeply integrated into the hegemony's purpose, turned toward the planet with obvious hostile intent. Nera, Daniel warned, "We've got incoming." She nodded, feeling exhaustion beginning to set in as the strain of integration began to take its toll. "PI, can we get back to the planet?" "Certainly, though I should note that our actions here have been observed." On the main display, new contacts were appearing. Ships emerging from hyperspace around the planet, not Krivak vessels, but something else entirely. Human ships, dozens of them emerging from hiding places throughout the system. Sanctuary wasn't the only human outpost, Daniel realized. They've been coordinating, waiting for this moment. The signal we broadcast when we freed the Krivak collective, the PI explained. It was received by monitoring stations throughout human space. The 3,000-year preparation is coming to an end. Pathfinder disengaged from the crippled dreadnought and turned toward home. Around them, the space battle continued as liberated Krivak vessels fought against those still loyal to the hegemony. But humans were no longer alone in that fight. Ships of a dozen different species were emerging from hiding, answering the call to freedom that Nera's action had broadcast across the galaxy. As they descended toward the planet's surface, Daniel looked at Nera with newfound respect. "You realize what you've done, don't you? You've started a revolution." Nera smiled wearily, feeling the disconnect as the Harmony staff powered down and her consciousness returned fully to her own body. Sometimes, revolutions are necessary. The Alari understood that, even if we didn't get the chance to act on it. They landed at a different location than they had launched from a much larger facility that had been hidden beneath what appeared to be natural rock formations. As the ship settled into its berth, Nera could see hundreds of humans moving with excited purpose. On the screens around the landing bay, images of the space battle above played alongside communications from other human outposts across the galaxy. Commander Hayes was waiting as they emerged from Pathfinder, her expression mixing relief with amazement. The readings we're getting from Pathfinder are incredible. What happened up there? A partnership, Nara replied simply. One that should have happened long ago. Over the following hours, as reports came in from across the galaxy, the scale of what had occurred became clear. The Krivak hegemony, a force that had dominated galactic politics for 3 millennia, had effectively collapsed overnight. Some of its component species had chosen freedom, others had fled beyond the galactic rim, and a few were still fighting desperately to maintain the old order. But more importantly, the enforced isolation that had kept advanced species separated and weak had ended. Communication networks that had been hidden for thousands of years were suddenly active again. Species that had thought themselves alone were reaching out to each other, forming alliances, sharing knowledge. There's going to be chaos for a while, Hayes admitted, as they watched a real-time map of the galaxy being redrawn minute by minute. 3,000 years of enforced stagnation don't end overnight without consequences. But it's a good chaos, Daniel observed. For the first time in millennia, species can develop without fear of being eliminated the moment they become interesting enough. Nara nodded, though she was looking thoughtfully at a particular section of the galactic map. There's still the question of what the Krivak were so afraid of. That threat beyond the rim, it's still out there. One crisis at a time, Hayes suggested. Right now, we have refugees from a dozen different species, asking for sanctuary human outposts emerging from hiding across the galaxy, and about 1 million logistical nightmares to sort out. Speaking of which, Daniel said, turning to Nara, we're going to need someone to help coordinate with the liberated Alari populations. According to our communications, several of their hidden colonies are still intact. Nara's eyes widened. Other Alari alive? Apparently your people were more successful at the hiding game than they realized. There are at least 6 major population centers that the Krivak never found. For the first time since the attack on her settlement, Nara allowed herself to hope. Not just for survival, but for revival, the chance to rebuild what had been lost, to restore the connections that had been severed. Over the next several days, Sanctuary transformed from a hidden refuge into a bustling hub of galactic politics. Representatives from dozens of species arrived, many meeting face-to-face for the first time in millennia. Languages that had been nearly extinct were dusted off and revived. Technologies that had been hidden away were shared freely. Nara found herself at the center of much of the coordination. Her role in the liberation of the Krivak had made her something of a legend among the various species, but more importantly, her connection to both Alari technology and human engineering made her an ideal bridge between different groups. She and Daniel worked closely together during this period, and she found their partnership growing beyond mere cooperation. There was a connection between them that went deeper than shared crisis, an understanding that crossed species lines. You know, Daniel said one evening, as they stood on one of Sanctuary's observation decks, watching shuttles arrive and depart in a constant stream. There's something I never told you about Pathfinder. Oh! The ship wasn't just designed using Alari principles. It was designed for an Alari pilot. Someone who could interface directly with the control systems using a Harmony staff. He paused, looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. We always knew that eventually we'd need an Alari partner to unlock the ship's full potential. Nara considered this. So when I crashed into your shelter, it wasn't just chance. Oh, that part was absolutely chance. But what happened after? Maybe that was something else entirely. Before she could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the facility. Not the harsh warning they had heard before, but something more urgent and immediate. Hayes's voice echoed over the communication system. All senior staff to the command center immediately. We have a situation. They arrived to find the center in controlled chaos. The main display showed a view of space above the planet, where the liberation battle had finally ended hours ago. But now, something new was happening. A ship was emerging from hyperspace, but not like any ship they had seen before. It was massive, larger even than the Krivak dreadnought they had fought, but its design was completely different. Elegant curves instead of biomechanical angles, materials that seemed to shimmer with internal light. "Any idea what that is?" Daniel asked. Hayes shook her head. "It doesn't match any design in our databases, but it's transmitting on frequencies we haven't seen since the early days of galactic civilization." Nera finished, her voice filled with awe. "Those are ancient frequencies, pre-Krivak. The ship is requesting permission to approach," the communications officer reported. "They're asking for the Herald of the Harmony Spear." All eyes turned to Nera. "I think they want to talk to you." Minutes later, they were gathered in one of Sanctuary's larger meeting chambers as the unknown ship approached. The vessel was even more impressive up close, easily, a kilometer in length, its hull patterns shifting and flowing like liquid art. A shuttle launched from the mystery ship, approaching with the same elegant grace as its parent vessel. When it landed in Sanctuary's main bay, the beings that emerged were unlike anything any of them had ever seen. They were tall, perhaps 8 feet on average, with elongated limbs, and features that seemed to shift and change depending on the viewing angle. Their skin had a luminous quality, and when they moved, it was with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't entirely physical. The leader of the group approached them with movements that were simultaneously alien and familiar. When it spoke, the words seemed to form directly in their minds, rather than being heard. "I am Navigator Secondary of the Watching Fleet. We have observed what transpired here with great interest. The liberation of the Krivak Collective, the restoration of the ancient networks, the awakening of the Harmony Spear, these actions have consequences beyond this galaxy." Nera stepped forward, the Harmony staff in her hands, beginning to resonate in response to the being's presence. "Who are you? What is the Watching Fleet?" "We are those who came before. Those who built the first civilizations, established the first networks of communication and trade between species. We are also those who withdrew when the great threat emerged from beyond the rim." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. These were the ancients, the mysterious species that had vanished at the beginning of recorded galactic history, leaving behind only ruins and legends. "The Krivak," Daniel said slowly. "They weren't just afraid of some random threat. They were afraid of you." Navigator Secondary's expression shifted in what might have been amusement. "No, young engineer. They were afraid of what drove us into exile. The entity that we call the Devourer, an intelligence from outside this galaxy that feeds on the technological potential of civilizations. The Krivak believed that by keeping all species weak and divided, they could avoid attracting the Devourer's attention," the being continued. "In this, they were partially correct, but they were also delaying the inevitable. Eventually, the Devourer would have come regardless." Nera felt a chill run down her spine. "And now, by liberating the galaxy, by encouraging technological development, you have done exactly what needed to be done." Navigator Secondary interrupted. "The Devourer feeds on potential, yes, but it is also defeated by unity. The Krivak's approach, isolation, stagnation, fear, these things make a galaxy vulnerable. A united galaxy, one where species cooperate and share knowledge, becomes something far more powerful." Hayes leaned forward. "And the Harmony Spear you called Nera, its herald. The herald of the device that could transcend individual species limitations." The ancient turned to Nera specifically. "Your staff, combined with human technology and the wisdom of other species, has become something new, a tool for building bridges between consciousnesses, for creating understanding across impossible gaps." "Show them," Daniel said suddenly. "Show them what we built together." Nera nodded, understanding immediately. She raised the Harmony staff, and its crystal core began to glow. But this time, instead of focusing her own psionic energy, she reached out to the minds around her, human, ancient, and even the AI consciousness of Pathfinder, which was monitoring from the ship. What followed was unlike anything any of them had experienced. For a moment, the barriers between species dissolved. Human Alari and ancient consciousness touched and intermingled, sharing thoughts and emotions, without the filter of language or cultural difference. In that moment of connection, they all saw the same thing, a vision of the galaxy as it could be. Species working together, sharing knowledge, freely building wonders that no single civilization could achieve alone. And standing against the coming darkness from beyond the rim, they saw a united front that would not fall to fear or isolation. The connection faded, leaving them all somewhat breathless, but fundamentally changed. "This," Navigator Secondary said with what was unmistakably approval, "is what we had hoped to see. The Harmony Spear, not just a weapon, but a tool for building understanding." "Then you'll help us?" Hayes asked. "When the Devourer comes, and I'm assuming it will come, you'll stand with us." "We will stand with you," the Ancient confirmed. "As we should have done long ago instead of retreating into hiding. The time for exile is over." Over the following weeks, the galaxy continued to transform at an almost unprecedented pace. The watching fleet emerged from their hiding places throughout galactic space, bringing with them technologies and knowledge that had been lost for millions of years. Species that had hidden from the Krivak for centuries emerged into the light, eager to reconnect with the galactic community. Nera found herself traveling constantly, serving as an ambassador and coordinator between the various factions. The Harmony staff had become more than a personal weapon. It was a symbol of the new unity, a reminder that different species could not only coexist, but thrive together. But it was during a return trip to Sanctuary that she made a discovery that changed everything once again. She and Daniel were aboard Pathfinder, returning from a diplomatic mission to one of the newly contacted Alari colonies, when the ship's AI made an unexpected announcement. "Nera, I am detecting unusual resonance patterns from the Harmony staff. It appears to be responding to something in this system." "What kind of something?" she asked, moving to the instrument panel, where the staff was currently interfaced with the ship's systems. "Unknown, but the patterns suggest another Harmony device." Daniel looked up from his navigation calculations. "That's impossible. You said the staff was one of a kind, passed down through your family." "It was," Nera confirmed. "But the Alari had many artifacts of power. Perhaps—" She paused as the staff's resonance grew stronger. "PI, can you triangulate the source?" "Calculating. The signal appears to be coming from the fourth planet in this system, the world you call Kareth Prime." Nera's breath caught. Kareth Prime, her homeworld, the place where her settlement had been destroyed. They had avoided returning there since the attack, assuming it held nothing but painful memories and Krivak contamination. "Take us there," she said quietly. Daniel looked concerned. "Nera, are you sure? I know it's been hard." "I need to see what's there. The staff is reacting to something important." They approached Kareth Prime carefully, scanning for any residual Krivak presence. The planet appeared unchanged, the same red deserts, the same scattered mountain ranges, the same dried riverbeds that spoke of ancient waters. But as they descended toward the ruins of Nera's settlement, the Harmony staff's resonance became almost overpowering. The crystal core was pulsing with such intensity that it was difficult to look at directly. "There," Nera pointed to a section of ruins they had never explored thoroughly before. "Land there." They touched down in what had once been the settlement's central plaza. The buildings around them were still blackened from Krivak fire, but something felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Following the staff's pull, Nera led Daniel through the ruins toward what had once been the settlement's most sacred building, the archive, where the oldest records and artifacts had been kept. She had assumed it had been destroyed with everything else. But as they approached, they found the building largely intact. More than intact, it was humming with energy, its ancient stone walls carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the gathering dusk. "The defensive systems," Nera breathed. "They activated when the attack began and sealed the building." The entrance was blocked by a barrier of solid energy, but as Nera approached with the Harmony staff, the barrier flickered and dissolved. Inside the archive was exactly as she remembered it. Walls, lined with crystal storage devices, air filled with the soft harmonics of sleeping technology. But in the center of the main chamber, something new had appeared. Or rather, something old had awakened. Rising from the floor was a pedestal that Nera had never seen before, and hovering above it was a device that made her heart race with recognition and wonder. It looked like her staff, but larger, more complex. Where her staff had a single crystal core, this device had 7, each one a different color, and each one pulsing with its own rhythm. "The Master Harmony," she whispered. "I thought it was just a legend." As she approached, the device began to resonate with her staff. The two artifacts called to each other across the chamber, their combined harmonics creating music that seemed to touch the very soul. "Nera," Daniel said softly, "what is that thing?" "According to the legends, it's the original harmony device, the one used to create the eternal weave that connected all Alari across space and time." She paused, studying the artifact more closely. "But if it's here, if it survived the Krivak attack..." She reached out carefully, letting her staff's energy interface with the Master Harmony. The moment they touched the chamber, exploded with light. Images flashed through Nera's mind, visions of the Alari, as they once were, thousands of worlds connected by the eternal weave, a civilization that spanned galaxies. But more than that, she saw the true purpose of the Harmony devices. They weren't just tools for communication or weapons for warfare. They were keys. "Daniel," she said, her voice filled with awe and terror. "We need to contact the Ancients immediately. The Harmony devices, they're not just artifacts of the Alari. They're part of something much larger." "What do you mean?" "The Devourer isn't just coming to our galaxy. It's coming because of what we've awakened. The Harmony Spear, we created the Master Harmony here. They're part of a galaxy-wide network, a defense system left behind by whoever came before even the Ancients." The implications were staggering. The Harmony devices weren't Alari technology. They were something far older, predating known civilization. Her people had been guardians of something they didn't fully understand, keepers of keys to a system designed to protect the galaxy from threats from beyond. "So when we used the Harmony Spear to liberate the Krivak," Daniel said slowly, "we activated part of this network." "And drew the Devourer's attention," Nera nodded grimly. "But that's not necessarily a bad thing. If we can activate the entire network, unite all the Harmony devices across the galaxy, we might actually stand a chance." They transmitted their findings back to Sanctuary, and within hours, ships were converging on Karath Prime from across the galaxy. Ancients, humans, freed Krivak Alari from the hidden colonies, all coming to witness the awakening of something that predated them all. Commander Hayes was among the first to arrive, bringing with her some of the galaxy's finest scholars and engineers. But it was Navigator Secondary who provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. "Your species were not the original creators of the Harmony devices," the Ancient confirmed. "They were made by those who came before even us, a species that fought the Devourer billions of years ago, and won." "What happened to them?" Nera asked. "They transcended, became something beyond physical existence. But before they did, they left behind safeguards. The Harmony Network was one of them, a system that could be activated when the need was great enough." Hayes studied the Master Harmony device with fascination and concern. "So, by awakening this network, we're following a plan laid down eons ago." "More than that," Navigator Secondary replied. "You are completing it. The network requires representatives from multiple species to function at full capacity. It was designed to only activate when the galaxy achieved true unity. And so began the most ambitious project in galactic history. Harmony devices were discovered on worlds across the galaxy, some in ancient ruins, others in places no one had thought to look. Each device was unique, attuned to different aspects of consciousness and reality. Nera found herself at the center of the effort, her original staff, now part of a much larger whole. She and Daniel worked with teams from dozens of species, learning to integrate different technologies and consciousness types into a unified system. It wasn't easy. There were disagreements, miscommunications, failures that set them back weeks. Some species feared the power of the network, worried about losing their autonomy. Others pushed for premature activation, wanting to test the system before all components were in place. But gradually, piece by piece, the network came together. And with each new connection made each new device integrated, they could all feel something awakening. Not just machinery, but something like awareness, a presence that had slumbered for eons, but was now stirring to life. The moment of final activation came sooner than expected. Scouts on the galactic rim reported impossible readings, space itself bending and distorting as something massive forced its way through from beyond. The Devourer was coming, and it was larger than anyone had imagined. "How long until it reaches inhabited space?" Hayes asked, staring at the readings from the rim scouts. "At current velocity, 3 days," Navigator Secondary replied. "But it will begin affecting local space-time long before physical arrival. We are out of time." Nera looked around the gathered representatives, human, Alari ancient, and dozens of other species all working together in what might be their final hours. "Then we activate the network, now." The final activation required representatives from every participating species to link with the network simultaneously. Nera stood at the center, the Harmony staff that had started it all still in her hands. Around her, in a complex pattern that had been precisely calculated, stood ambassadors from across the galaxy. Daniel stood beside her, his hands resting on human technologies that had been integrated into the system. Navigator Secondary represented the ancients, their luminous form pulsing in rhythm with the awakening devices. Even former Krivak, now free to choose their own path, had representatives in the circle. Initiating network activation. The combined AI consciousness, announced Pathfinder's intelligence, merged with systems from a dozen other species. The Harmony devices began to glow, their light building slowly, and then with increasing intensity. Nera felt the familiar sensation of expanded consciousness, but magnified beyond anything she had ever experienced. Her awareness stretched across the galaxy. She could sense every planet, every star, every living thing connected to the network. But more than that, she could sense the approaching darkness, the Devourer, a presence of such alien hunger that it made the Krivak seem like children in comparison. But the network was more than just sensors. As consciousness merged across species lines, as the Harmony devices reached full activation, something new emerged. Not just the sum of participating minds, but something greater, a unified galactic consciousness that retained the individuality of its components while becoming something transcendent. Through this collective awareness, they reached out toward the approaching threat. The Devourer was ancient beyond measure, an entity that had consumed galaxies throughout the universe. It fed on potential, the creative force that drove civilization to grow and achieve. It had sensed the awakening of the Harmony network from across the cosmic void, drawn by the promise of a galaxy finally reaching true unity. But as it approached, it found not the usual fragmented, fearful civilizations it typically encountered. Instead, it found something that had never existed before, an entire galaxy, speaking with one voice, thinking with one mind, yet still maintaining the diversity and creativity that made each species unique. The confrontation, when it came, was not physical battle, but something far more fundamental. The Devourer sought to drain the potential of the galaxy, to leave behind empty husks of civilizations that would never again reach for the stars. But potential shared freely, among many, became something else entirely. As the Devourer tried to feed it, found that each attempt to drain energy only created more connections, more unity, more combined potential. Through the network, Nera felt the moment when the balance shifted. The Devourer, for the first time in its existence, encountered something it could not consume. The unified consciousness of the galaxy did not resist its hunger. It embraced it, offered itself freely, but in doing so transformed the very nature of what was being consumed. The entity that had devoured 1,000 galaxies found itself not feeding, but being nourished, not destroying, but creating. The alien intelligence that had known only hunger began to experience something it had never felt: satisfaction, connection, purpose beyond consumption. When the confrontation ended, both sides were changed. The devourer withdrew not in defeat, but in contemplation, returning to the void between galaxies to consider what it had learned. And the galaxy it left behind was forever transformed. The Harmony Network remained active, but not as a weapon or defense system. Instead, it became what its creators had always intended: a bridge between consciousnesses, a tool for understanding and cooperation that spanned species worlds and the vast distances between stars. Nera found herself standing again in the chamber where it had all begun, the Master Harmony device, still glowing softly before her. But she was not alone. Daniel stood beside her, his hand in hers. Around them, the chamber was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, friends and allies who had become something like family. "So what happens now?" Daniel asked, squeezing her hand gently. "Now we build," she replied, looking out through the chamber's viewport at the stars beyond. "Not just rebuilding what was lost, but creating something new, something better." Together, Hayes added, joining them at the viewport. "All of us." Navigator Secondary's form shimmered with something that might have been joy. "The exile is truly over, for all of us." And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, representatives of 100 species looked up at the same stars and felt the same sense of possibility. The age of fear and hiding was over. The age of isolation and stagnation was past. The age of harmony had begun. Years passed and the galaxy continued to change. The Harmony Network allowed for advances in technology and understanding that would have been impossible for any single species alone. Diseases that had plagued entire worlds for centuries were cured through the combined knowledge of dozens of civilizations. Technologies that had been theoretical became reality through shared research and cooperation. But perhaps the most important change was in the people themselves. Children grew up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated, where the differences between species were seen not as barriers, but as strengths. The old prejudices and fears still existed, but they were challenged by a generation that had never known a galaxy divided by fear. Nera and Daniel became symbols of this new age. Two individuals from different species who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, proof that the barriers between peoples were largely artificial constructs. They traveled the galaxy together, serving as ambassadors and mediators, but also simply as examples of what was possible. On every world they visited, they saw the same thing: species that had been enemies for millennia, learning to work together, ancient grudges being set aside in favor of shared goals. But they always returned to Karath Prime, to the place where it had all begun. The settlement had been rebuilt, not as it was, but as something new, a center of learning and cooperation where representatives from across the galaxy came to study the Harmony devices and learn to use them responsibly. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises and celebrations, Nera would stand in the desert and remember that day when she had run from a sandstorm and found shelter with a human who wasn't supposed to exist. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Daniel one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, "what would have happened if I had gone east instead of west that day? If I had missed the cave entirely?" Daniel considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I think we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not that day, maybe not in that cave, but somehow." The galaxy was moving toward this moment for 3,000 years. You and I, the Harmony staff and Pathfinder, the Alari and humanity, it was all meant to connect eventually. Nera smiled, leaning against his shoulder, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "That's a very romantic way of looking at fate." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the truth. He gestured at the sky above them, where the lights of dozens of different ships could be seen, moving between the stars. Alari vessels with their organic curves, human ships with their geometric precision, ancient craft that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, and dozens of other designs representing species from across the galaxy. Look at all of that. Every single one of those ships carries people who are choosing to work together to build something better than what came before. That didn't happen by accident. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the traffic above. The Harmony Network had made travel between worlds easier than ever before, and the galaxy had become a much smaller place. Ideas, art, technology, and culture flowed freely between species that had never even known of each other's existence just a few years ago. "There's something I need to tell you," Nera said eventually, her voice carrying a hint of nervousness that was unusual for her. Daniel turned to look at her more directly. "What is it?" She took his hands in hers, looking into his eyes, with an expression that was both excited and uncertain. "The medical teams on New Terra have been studying the long-term effects of exposure to the Harmony Network. They've discovered something interesting about cross-species relationships in our situation specifically. Interesting how the resonance between the Harmony staff and human technology, the consciousness merging we've experienced, it's created changes in both of us. Genetic-level changes that—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her, processing what she had said. "Pregnant. But that's supposed to be impossible. Human and Alari genetics aren't compatible." "They weren't," Nera confirmed. "But the Harmony Network has changed that. Dr. Chen says the child will be something new, not fully human, not fully Alari, but carrying the best of both species." Daniel's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, and then back to wonder. "We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as he laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "This is incredible," he said, his hands moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A child of both species. The first of a new generation." "Dr. Chen thinks there will be others," Nera said. "The genetic changes aren't limited to us. Other couples who've worked closely with the Harmony Network are showing similar adaptations. The galaxy isn't just becoming more connected culturally and technologically, it's becoming connected biologically as well." They talked long into the night about what this meant, not just for them personally, but for the galaxy as a whole. A generation of children who would grow up truly between worlds, belonging to multiple species, simultaneously, might be exactly what the galaxy needed to ensure that the divisions of the past never returned. News of the pregnancy spread quickly through the galactic community, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Messages of congratulation came from across the galaxy, from human colonies, Alari settlements, ancient enclaves, and dozens of other species. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source. A transmission from beyond the galactic rim, in the region where the Devourer had retreated after its encounter with the Harmony Network. The message was unlike anything they had received before, not words or images, but pure concept and emotion, transmitted directly to their consciousness through the Harmony Network. It carried ideas of curiosity, of interest in this new development, of something like approval. "I think," Nera said after experiencing the transmission, "the Devourer is learning to create instead of just consume, and it sees our child as proof that its change is reflected in the galaxy as well." 9 months later, in a medical facility on New Terra that had representatives from dozens of species, all working together, Nera gave birth to a healthy daughter. The baby had her mother's pointed ears and luminous skin, but her father's eyes and facial structure. Most remarkably, she seemed to respond to both human technology and Alari psionic energy with equal ease. They named her Aria, which meant harmony, in one of the old human languages, and new song in Alari. As Nera held her daughter for the first time, she felt the baby's consciousness brush against hers, through a natural psionic connection. But there was something more, a sense that Arya was connected not just to her parents, but to the Harmony Network itself. She was a child of the galaxy in the truest sense. Dr. Chen, who had overseen the pregnancy, ran her final scans with barely contained excitement. "The genetic integration is even more complete than we predicted," she reported. "Arya isn't just carrying traits from both species. She is carrying enhanced traits that seem to be completely new." "Enhanced how?" Daniel asked, never taking his eyes off his daughter. "Her brain shows neural pathways we've never seen before. Her cellular structure appears to be optimized for interfacing with both organic and technological systems. If our models are correct, she'll mature with capabilities that surpass either parent species." "The future generation," Nera murmured, understanding flooding through her. "This is how the galaxy truly moves forward, not just through cooperation between existing species, but through the creation of something entirely new." As if in response to her words, baby Arya opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother. For just an instant, Nera felt a flash of connection through the Harmony Network, a glimpse of the world as her daughter would see it. A place without the artificial barriers between species, where differences were celebrated and combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. 10 years passed, and Arya grew up in a galaxy that was rapidly becoming everything the Harmony Network's creators had envisioned. She attended schools where human children learned, alongside Alari Ancient and a dozen other species. She played games that required both technological skill and psionic ability. She spoke fluent galactic standard, but also communicated in the harmonic languages of the Alari and the conceptual speech of the Ancients. But more than that, she had friends from across the galaxy who visited through the Harmony Network, sharing experiences and knowledge across impossible distances. The network had evolved beyond its original purpose, becoming a medium for education, entertainment, and cultural exchange that connected every conscious being willing to participate. On Arya's 10th birthday, the family returned to Karath Prime for a celebration. The rebuilt settlement had grown into a proper city, with buildings that blended architecture from dozens of different species. The Master Harmony device still stood at its center, now surrounded by a garden where plants from across the galaxy grew together in impossible harmony. As they walked through the garden, Arya, running ahead to greet friends who had come from other worlds to celebrate with her Nera, and Daniel reflected on how much had changed. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Daniel asked, watching his daughter laugh with a group of children that included humans, Alari, former Kravak, who had chosen freedom, and species whose names he still had trouble pronouncing. "Look at her," Nera replied. "Look at all of them. Those children don't see differences the way we do. To them, diversity is just the natural state of things. If that's not doing the right thing, I don't know what is." They were interrupted by Arya running back to them, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad, the Pathfinder intelligence wants to talk to us. It says it has something important to show us." They made their way to the spaceport where Pathfinder was docked. The ship had been modified over the years, expanded, and enhanced with technologies from dozens of species. It was no longer just a human vessel with Alari components. It had become something uniquely galactic. The ship's AI had evolved as well, growing from a simple artificial intelligence to something approaching true consciousness. It had requested to be called simply Pathfinder, now considering itself not as a tool, but as a member of the family. "Welcome aboard," Pathfinder's voice said as they entered the bridge. The ship's tone had developed a warmth over the years that spoke of genuine affection for its crew. "I have something remarkable to show you." The main display activated, showing a view of space that seemed to be from well beyond the galactic rim. But this wasn't a recording. The images were coming through the Harmony Network from the farthest reaches of known space. "The exploration fleets have discovered something," Pathfinder explained. "At the edge of our galaxy, where the Devourer departed, new structures are appearing. The images showed massive constructs drifting in the void between galaxies. Not ships exactly, but something like space-borne cities. They were beautiful with organic curves and technological precision, combining in ways that seemed almost artistic. The Devourer is building instead of consuming, Nera realized. It's creating habitats, places for life to exist in the void between galaxies. More than that, Pathfinder continued. Analysis of the structures shows design principles from dozens of different galaxies. The Devourer has been collecting more than just consuming. It's been preserving the best of every civilization it encountered, saving them for when it learned how to create. Daniel stared at the images in wonder. It's using everything it learned from us, from our example of unity and cooperation. It's building something new. And that's not the most remarkable part, Pathfinder added. The constructs are inhabited. Species from across this galaxy and others working together to build something unprecedented intergalactic civilization. Arya pressed closer to the screen, her young face filled with wonder. Can we go there? Can we visit them? Nera and Daniel exchanged glances. The journey to the intergalactic constructs would take years, even with the most advanced ships available. It would mean leaving behind everything they had built on Karath Prime. But then again, they had made similar journeys before. From hiding in the desert, to fighting in space, from isolated species to galactic unity, their lives had been defined by crossing impossible distances and bridging unbridgeable gaps. What do you think? Daniel asked his family. Ready for another adventure? Arya's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, think of everything we could learn, all the new friends we could make. Nera looked at her daughter, this child, who represented the hope of a galaxy, who had never known fear of the unknown, because she had been raised in a world where differences were celebrated rather than feared. I think, Nera said slowly, it's time the Harmony Network had representatives in intergalactic space. Someone needs to build bridges between the galaxies, just like we built them between species. And so began another chapter in their lives. Pathfinder was upgraded once again, this time for intergalactic travel. The Harmony staff was integrated with new technologies that would allow communication across the void between galaxies. Families of multiple species volunteered to make the journey together, creating a crew that truly represented the unity they had achieved. As they prepared to depart, the entire galactic community seemed to be watching. Messages of support and farewell came from every inhabited world. The Harmony Network carried the emotions of trillions of beings, excitement for the journey, sadness at the parting, and hope for what might be found in the void. The day of departure was marked with celebrations across the galaxy. On Karath Prime, thousands gathered to see them off. Representatives from every species came to wish them well. Even Navigator Secondary was there, the ancient's luminous form more brilliant than usual. You carry with you the hopes of the galaxy, the ancient said, as they prepared to board Pathfinder. But more than that, you carry proof that consciousness can evolve, that even the greatest differences can be bridged. We'll be back, Nera promised. This isn't goodbye forever. No, Navigator Secondary agreed. This is expansion, the galaxy growing beyond its own borders. As Pathfinder lifted off from Karath Prime for the last time, Nera stood at the viewport with her family, watching the planet fall away beneath them. The place where she had nearly died in a sandstorm, where she had found love and purpose and hope for the future. Any regrets? Daniel asked, taking her hand. She thought about it seriously, as she always did with his questions. About leaving, no. About that day in the desert, never. Arya pressed against the viewport, watching the stars wheel past, as Pathfinder oriented itself toward the galactic edge. Tell me the story again, Mom. About the sandstorm and the cave and how you met Dad. Nera laughed, settling into the familiar rhythm of a tale she had told countless times. But it never got old, this story of how two species had found each other in the darkness and discovered they weren't alone. Well, she began, there was a storm coming, the biggest storm I had ever seen. And as Pathfinder carried them toward the void between galaxies, toward new adventures and new connections to be made, Nera told her daughter again about the day that changed everything. About a choice between east and west, about finding shelter in the darkness, about discovering that the galaxy was far larger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. Behind them, the galaxy they left was no longer the same place it had been when Nera first ran from that sandstorm years ago. It was united, harmonious, growing and creating, rather than hiding and fearing. And ahead of them lay infinite possibility, new worlds to discover, new species to meet, new bridges to build between consciousness and consciousness across the vast dark of space. The story that had begun with one desperate Alari warrior seeking shelter from a storm had become the story of an entire galaxy learning to shelter each other. And now, as they headed toward the unknown, once again, it was becoming something even greater. The story of consciousness itself, reaching across impossible distances, refusing to be limited by the boundaries of biology or space or time. The story of harmony spreading from one gallery to another, carrying with it the lesson that differences were not barriers to be overcome, but gifts to be shared. And in the end, perhaps that was the most important thing of all, that no one had to face the storm alone.